And so often I've noticed on Alpha, people say, when we say, how do you come to be here? They say, well, I noticed a change in my wife. I noticed a change in my husband. I noticed a change in my son, in my daughter, in my parent, in my friend at work. They see the difference. It involves, of course, more than just our family and our immediate friends. It involves the needs of the people around us. Relieving human need, hunger, homelessness, poverty. I'm just so impressed by, well, many of you and all the young people in our church when I see the kind of things that they get involved in. And then social justice, the removal of injustice, inhumanity, gross inequality in our society. William Wilberforce, he was aged 27, which is actually the median age. It's kind of the average age of people who come on an Alpha course here at this church. He was age 27 when he sensed God's call to fight against the inhuman, degrading slave trade. 10 million slaves left Africa for the plantations in the year 1787. And in that year, he put down a motion in the House of Commons about the slave trade. It was not a popular cause, but he said this: so enormous, so dreadful did its wickedness appear that my own mind was completely made up for abolition. Let the consequences be what they would, I from that time determined I would never rest until I had effected its abolition. Bills were debated in 1789, 1791, 1792, 1794, 1796, 1798, 1799. They all failed. In 1831, he sent a message to the Anti-Slavery Society in which he said, our motto must be perseverance, and ultimately I trust the Almighty will crown our efforts with success. He did. In July 1833, the Abolition of Slavery Bill was passed in both Houses of Parliament. 3 days later, Wilberforce died. He was buried in Westminster Abbey in national recognition of his 45 years of persevering struggle on behalf of African slaves. But what about today? There are massive needs, injustices out there. Today and every day, until we act, 30,000 children die because of avoidable diseases, i.e. because they live in poverty. 8,000 die of AIDS every day in developing countries. There will be 15 million preventable deaths this year. And that's what I love about what Bono is doing, inspired by his Christian faith. And he was invited to speak at the Labour Party conference in Brighton. He said this. He said, my name is Bono. I'm a rock star. Excuse me if I appear a little nervous. I'm not used to appearing before crowds of less than 80,000 people. I heard the word party, obviously got the wrong idea. And he went on to speak of his time working in an Ethiopian orphanage. He said, we lived for a month working at the orphanage. The locals knew me as Dr. Good Morning. The children called me the girl with the beard. Don't ask. It just blew my mind. It opened my mind. On our last day at the orphanage, a man handed me his baby and said, take him with you. He knew in Ireland his son would live. In Ethiopia, his son would die. I turned him down. In that moment, I started this journey. In that moment, I became the worst thing of all, a rock star with a cause. Except this isn't a cause. 6,500 Africans dying a day of treatable, preventable disease, dying for want of medicines you and I can get at our local chemist. That's not a cause, that's an emergency. Nelson Mandela said this, it's not the kings and generals who make history, but the masses of the people. That's the first P, presence. Secondly, persuasion. Would you like to turn to Acts chapter 17, verses 2 to 4? As his custom was, Paul went into the synagogue. On 3 Sabbath days, he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I'm proclaiming to you is the Christ, he said. Some of them were persuaded. There's a big difference, I think, between pressure and persuasion. Pressure is not a good idea. I don't know how you respond to pressure, but I run a mile if anyone tries to pressurize me to do anything. And the effect of pressure is the opposite effect of persuasion. Pressure is very unpersuasive. But Paul says he tries to persuade people. And he does it by reasoning, by explaining. Because the Christian faith is not a blind leap of faith. It's a reasonable step of faith. There are good reasons to believe. And that's why I would encourage you to look into those reasons quite carefully. So that if somebody says to you, well, what is the evidence for the resurrection? You're able to say, well, actually, there's quite a lot. And that you've thought about it. If somebody says to you, well, how can you believe when there's so much suffering in the world? Of course, we don't have neat answers to these, but there's something that we can say. Again, don't bother to turn to because we haven't got time, but in 1 Peter 3, verse 15, Peter writes this: always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. And I think respect also means being honest. That's why it's okay to say, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. But I'll go away and find out. I think we need a little bit of a multi-layered approach, because certainly in my case, I had intellectual objections, and I believe they were genuine intellectual objections to the Christian faith. But at the same time, I think with hindsight, as I look back on my life, there were other things going on at the same time. I think, for example, I was beginning to realize the implications that becoming a Christian might have for my lifestyle. And possibly, although the reasons that I was giving to people were the intellectual reasons, deep down for me it was a moral question as well. And also I was a bit worried about the fact that I had argued quite semi-publicly against Christianity. I was sort of known in the university that I was at for the arguments against Christianity. So I thought, I'm going to really lose face if I suddenly turn around and say I've become a Christian. But I'm so grateful for the people who did help me to overcome my objections. And I think that trying to persuade people, again, is an act of love. Third P is proclamation. It's communicating the message at the heart of Christianity. It's all about Jesus. And I suppose that's what we're trying to do on the Alpha Course, to focus on the person of Jesus and try to communicate that message. And there are many ways that we can do this. But one of the simplest ways is simply to say to people, come and see. Would you like to turn to John chapter 1, verse 35? The next day, John was there again with 2 of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, look, the Lamb of God. When the 2 disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning round, Jesus saw them following and asked, what do you want? They said, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? Come, he replied, and you'll see. So they went and saw where he was staying and spent that day with him. It was about the 10th hour. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the 2 who heard what John had said and who'd followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother, Simon, and tell him, we found the Messiah, that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, you're Simon, son of John. You'll be called Cephas, which is translated Peter. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, follow me. Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked. Come and see. It's so natural, isn't it, to say,